accept, trying to phrase it, accept failure as part of the success. Does it make sense?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the MentorZ Podcast. I'm your host, Ava Wettrick. Here on this show, we talk to luminaries from around the world to discuss their journey towards success and what wisdom they have to offer the younger generation. Each episode, we have on a new guest, a new story, and a new path towards personal success. I hope you're ready, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MentorZ. Today we have on Arie Brish. Arie is the founder and CEO of CXO360 and is an expert on the field of innovation and commercialization. He wrote the bestseller business book, Lay an Egg and Make Chicken Soup. For years, Arie has been a mentor to dozens of startups, companies, and various Fortune 500 companies, helping them all scale and commercialize their businesses. I was very excited to have on Arie because he brings numbers and facts to the table. In this podcast, he really dives into the nuts and bolts of how to commercialize, innovate, and grow a company. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to MentorZ. Today we have on Arie Brish. Arie, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Eva.
I always start off with the same question for all of my guests. What is your origin story? Who were you then, and how did you become who you are now?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me dial back just a few years. So I started. I'll tell you a story. Okay, that kind of set the stage for the entire future years. So, I grew up in Israel, and when I had to make the choice where to go to school, that was in the early 70s. It was the middle of the energy crisis in the world. The government of Israel decided to accelerate having a power plant, electrical power plant, powered by nuclear energy. So in order to accelerate training people, they started the undergraduate class for power engineer for nuclear engineering, and normally nuclear engineering, I don't know about today, but back in the days it was only a graduate class. So I said, that's something new. I love it. I'm going to do it just because the only reason because it's new. Okay, so my choice was go and it was a remote school. So we had to move, and we started this nuclear engineering curriculum. And then a couple of semesters later, the government changed the plan. I think the oil prices, fluctuates, and they decided to not do the nuclear power plant, and they canceled our class. So the school felt bad. They came to us and said, "Okay, kids." Well, kids, we were in 20, I guess. Okay, kids, we screw you, so you can now, and you came to this remote town. Now you can choose any school you want without any acceptance test. You were already accepted to the nuclear engineering, so we let you choose whatever you want. And I scratched my head. I didn't know what to choose, but then they helped me. They came a week later and said, oops, sorry, we misled you again. You can choose anything you want except of electrical engineering. You have to re-qualify for electrical engineering. So that made my decision or my choice very easy. I said, okay, you said electrical engineering need to re-qualify. I will go for electrical engineering. I did not have a clue of why or what electrical engineering is doing day to day, but the only reason I chose it is because they said you have to qualify. Everything else you can enter without qualifying. So sometimes you make life decision just a matter of to prove a point to somebody. So it was just shooting from the hip to prove them wrong that I can qualify for electrical engineering. So dial a few years into the program. The one thing that was pretty new at the time, that's late 70s, was computer engineering and semiconductor. So that was the beginning of microprocessors and the beginning of personal computers, even though it was not that pervasive at the time. It was just something that we engineers talked about, that this is something that is going to happen in the next 10 or 15 years, a new revolution. Everybody will have a computer on their desk. That was totally crazy idea. The computers were big mainframes hiding behind walls and what have you. So once again, I took my specialty in electrical engineering to be in microprocessors, microcomputers, and semiconductors. And my first job after that, after I graduated, my first job was designing one of the very first microprocessors in the industry. So, and that will lead, the next chapter of this story will lead to the book I wrote. It's kind of, there is a connection there. So it was totally new at the time. It's like today doing, I don't know, self-driving car or artificial intelligence. It was something totally new. Nobody knew what the industry or what life is going to be 20 years later, when this thing we called it microcomputers at the time. The word personal computer was coined or invented only a few years later.
Wow. That's incredible. You were definitely on the bleeding edge of technology, helping to create something phenomenal.
Yes, that was definitely the case. People didn't even know what I'm working about. I tried to explain to my family and friends what I'm doing, and nobody understood.
I don't blame them. I bet if some phenomenal scientist came up to me and said, I'm working on a high-tech project, I'd be like, I will listen. I have no idea what you mean, though.
Yeah, exactly.
And then what made the transition over into like the startup life, into business? And, how did you go from, on the bleeding edge of technology to the business realm?
That's another kind of personal story. I during my college years, I used to kind of pay my way through by being a lifeguard in a swimming pool. We talked about that a little bit.
Oh yeah.
And that was a college town, so many of the people that came to enjoy that swimming pool were university professors, and they would hang out with a lifeguard and just chit chat and over a beer. So one of these professors, was sitting with me, talking about what's next after undergraduate, and I told him maybe I'll go and do a master in electrical engineering again or something, and he said, no, you better go and do an MBA or something like that, because the combination of engineering and MBA will be, or is, very powerful when you get promoted in the organizations. And back then the startup was not very popular. So basically you start your job in a big company and you just advance and being promoted every few years. So he said, if you want to be promoted, you better go and do an MBA instead of another master in electrical engineering. And after the fact, many years later, looking back, he was totally right. So I started my MBA, and in parallel of right after my graduation, I started to work as a microprocessor designer, designing one of the very first microprocessor. And in the evenings, I started to take my MBA classes very quickly, and that's kind of jumping into the topic of the book. So as a young R&D engineer, all you think about is perfecting your product. So finally, after 2 or 3 years of R&D efforts, we had to take it into production, launch the marketing, take it to the market, to the basically the market, and my engineering job was in Israel, but then they needed somebody to go relocate to the Silicon Valley to support all the commercialization efforts. And that basically two things. One is support transfer to production, and one is supporting the marketing and customers. So they transferred me, relocated me to Silicon Valley, and then I realized how much work there is in post R&D in order to make a product a commercial success. And our product was probably 5 years ahead of competition. Our two main competitors were Motorola and Intel. And even though our product was superior, Motorola and Intel did a much better job in the commercialization part, and they basically won the entire PC market. Intel won the IBM PC at the time, and Motorola won the Motorola microprocessor won the Apple computer or the Apple personal computers at the time, and my company stayed behind only because even though the product was superior, we lost the personal computer race because our two other competitors executed better on the commercialization phase. And that's basically the focus of my entire book. By the way, the book is Lay an Egg and Make Chicken Soup. It became a bestseller, and the focus is on the execution of the commercialization. Coming up, and you mentioned your audience are mostly young people, Generation Z. Coming up with a great idea is something that it's probably inherent in a young age because you're not boxed yet in whatever preconceived box it is. When I work for the corporate world, I like always to have interns because of the same reason that they're not boxed, so they come up with always with good ideas, and you just filter the good ideas and run with it. So the young age is good for making good ideas, out of the box ideas or new paradigms. But then the bad news, at a young age you don't have the experience and the scars to know what obstacles are waiting for you, and so the combination of being creative and generating good ideas, and then having somebody that guide you on the execution phase, it's a winning combination, and you can do it in two ways. One way we discussed before the call, you can do it by having experienced mentors. The other way is what Michael Dell did when he started Dell Computer. He was a young college guy, but all his lieutenants, all his vice presidents were very experienced people. So he was smart enough to say, I don't know anything about execution, let me hire experienced people. So he was like 25 years CEO, and all his vice presidents were in their 40s and 50s. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that he had a great idea at the time, but one of the reasons he succeeded in growing the company to where it is today is the fact that he realized that he needs all these experienced people to help him launch his great idea.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know for a fact that you've been a mentor to dozens, if not hundreds and thousands, because of your book over the course of many years.
Right.
Not only, with all of the mentor experience that you have had in your time, especially when all of it comes down to commercialization, what does commercialization look like, and how did you innovate the process of that? And how have you, what are some of the tips and tricks you gained to really allow a startup or a product to take off?
So from a mentorship point of view, let me step back a little. So if again, talking about my book again, the structure of the book is every chapter is a discipline in the commercialization process, and the book has, I don't remember, 20 or 30 chapters. Here it is, let me check. Yeah, 22 chapters. The book has 22 chapters. The structure of the book, each chapter is one discipline in the process. So you can think about the book as a checklist, and you can have only the checklist as a free download on my website. But the book gives a little more color to it. The structure is every chapter in the so-called checklist. Every chapter starts with 2 or 3 pages of describing that particular discipline and how to connect it or how it's related to the innovation commercialization, and then few real life examples of either lesson learned, some are bad lessons, some are good lessons. So once you take this checklist or the book, consider every chapter in the book to be a chapter in your business plan. So you need to, when you come up with a new idea, you say, okay, now what? How do I manage the R&D? How do I market? How do I launch? How do I partner with ecosystem, with the entire ecosystem? That's another very important part of being successful is get the ecosystem buy-in into your new idea. Some new ideas can be launched without an ecosystem support, but in many cases you must have the ecosystem supporting you.
Absolutely. What is the ecosystem, and what does that look like, and how do you get them to support you?
Okay, example. One of my projects was in the air conditioning space. A new concept of air conditioning, just for the purpose of this discussion. The things, first of all, part of the ecosystem obviously is customers. So you need to talk to customers. Another part of the ecosystem is suppliers. And if you have something totally new, the suppliers, the components you need for your new idea or new product, again, you have to work with suppliers to build the building blocks for your service or product. But then in the case of this air condition product, there is air condition codes, how to design air conditions for the building, and whatever per square feet you need so much air conditioning power, blah, blah, blah. Our product was basically allow you to use less air condition for the same size building, thus saving significant energy, electrical bill for the building. And in commercial buildings, the electrical bills could be millions of dollars per year. So if you save 20-30%, that's a big chunk of money. But the code for the air condition did not support our new idea. So you had to work with the bodies that approve different ways of doing things and get their approval to deviate from the code, or to, in other words, to add our concept or our paradigm into the allowed engineering code. So engineers that design air conditioning for buildings will feel comfortable or will be empowered or to use our new technology. So it sounds simple, but it took 2 or 3 years to change the building codes to where it can accommodate our new paradigm. But then there are different government agencies that you need to negotiate, and sometimes you have to negotiate almost every city. I'll tell you an example. Uber is a more familiar brand. I don't know if they operate in your geography. I know in Austin, they had a hard time to penetrate the Austin market. The only reason is the lobby of the taxis lobby was strong enough with the city council that the city council did not allow Uber to come into the Austin market. The excuse at the time was the background check, on how to do background check for the drivers. So Uber had their own way to do a background check for the drivers. City of Austin said, no, we do not accept this background check. It took them a year to negotiate the approved background check that will allow them to operate in the Austin market. I don't remember exactly what compromise they got into, but they have to go and do it in every city. That's a lot of resources. They probably have to have dozens of people to go and knock on the door of every city and be allowed to operate in those cities. So people don't realize that, but that takes a lot of work. So everybody will agree Uber is a great idea, but then just to negotiate with every city council, that's so many resources on their part.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when you were discussing the situation with Uber and the air conditioners, it sounded like a lot of it was influenced by, like, not, it wasn't an emotional decision, but it was influenced by emotion. People want to feel safe, people want to feel comfortable, people want to make sure everything is right. How do you go in with a very logical mindset, with very logical people, and influence their emotions in the best way possible with your product or with your service that you're providing?
That's an excellent question. So first of all, in the Uber situation, it was more political pressure by the lobby of the traditional taxis and the traditional bus transportation. So they had pretty strong lobby to pressure the city council to put some obstacles on Uber. We see a similar thing, by the way, in Austin now, where the hotels lobby put some pressure against Airbnb, and there are some issues with the Austin city, that some discussions about putting some obstacles against Airbnb, for example, and it's totally because of the political pressures of the hotel industry. So going back to your question, in many cases, there are, well, emotional products are obvious. A pure emotional product is jewelry. For example, if you buy jewelry to your mom for Mother's Day, that's an emotional thing. She can continue to live without this jewelry forever, but you buy a jewelry, that's an emotional gift. There are many functional products that the decision to buy them are emotional. For example, cage-free eggs. I don't know if you buy eggs for your school dorms, but cage-free eggs cost about 3 times more expensive than traditional caged chicken eggs. But more and more people, I know, I pay this premium just because I feel sorry for the chickens, and it's becoming more and more popular. People buy, I don't know the most recent numbers, but in Europe, more than 50% of the eggs in the market are coming from cage-free chicken farms, and the motivation there is mainly emotional. There is no studies yet. It's too new. There is no studies yet that prove that cage-free eggs are more healthy or better for you or whatever it is. It's totally unproven yet. People buy the cage-free eggs just because they feel sorry for the chickens in the cage. So Europe is ahead of the US in that, but even in the US, it's becoming more and more popular. I know for me, I buy only cage-free eggs, even though they are more expensive. So this is a simple example of putting emotional considerations or emotional motivations in buying a functional product. You buy eggs because you want to eat the eggs. You don't buy eggs for emotional reasons. You buy the cage-free eggs you prefer to buy cage-free eggs for emotional reason. I'll give you another example from the B2B, business to business. So you think, okay, you buy eggs for emotional reasons. That's easy. That's one person emotions. But you think that when you do business between businesses, one company A sells a service to company B, the excuse me, the buyers or the engineers in company B, the decision makers, you would think that they make their decision only based on functional or objective motivation, and that's maybe theoretically that's true. I'll give you a couple of examples where this is not the case. And one example, one new product we had when I used to work at Motorola, so that's a large corporation. Our customers were, or the decision makers, the buying decision makers were engineers at our customers companies. So we sold to General Motors, we sold to IBM. So big, large corporations were engineers making the decision whether, technology X, to buy technology X or technology Y. So we developed technology Y that was different than technology X, but the promotional theme that we used when we launched the product was almost like scaring the engineers. We use scared strategy, scaring the engineers that if they do not learn how to use technology Y, they will be professionally obsolete in few years. And that worked phenomenally well. It was a super successful launch of a new technology, and the main campaign was around talking to the engineers, career motivation, and scaring them that without educating themselves in this new technology Y, call it Y for the purpose of this conversation, they will be obsolete, and it will be a big gap in their resume 5 years later. And it was a phenomenal success. A different example, again, real life. When you come to trying to sell a new product to somebody, sometime again in a business to business environment, the customer has to put some efforts and extra hours in evaluating this new product. So one of my customers that I knocked on their door, the guy told me, I love your product, but I like to be at 3 o'clock in my grandson's soccer game or soccer practice, so I'm not going to spend the extra hours required to evaluate your product. So thank you very much. So that's an emotional motivation to not accept my new product at the time. So this is another example, and that's once again, it's a B2B.
It's always very important to take an emotional consideration for the entire ecosystem like Arie described, and it's definitely something to ponder on until part 2 of this interview, which comes out tomorrow. Be sure to stay tuned for how to best influence these emotions, Arie's advice to young startups and young CEOs.